I pushed the sign into the ground and looked at the kids gathering up the street with thinly veiled satisfaction. "Keep off the dirt," it read. I'd seen the way their eyes gleam when the truck came to deliver it, deciding on a preemptive strike. A tall pile of fill dirt was irresistible for small children, and I needed as much of the dirt for my project as possible. Having it scattered all over the yard would make that very difficult, and I needed to post signs before the neighborhood rowdies got any ideas. I went back inside then, not wanting to field questions about my dirt. Sitting in my easy chair, pretending to watch TV, I could see them gathering around to look at the sign. They hunkered over their handlebars and looked dubiously at the sign I had stuck in the mountain of dirt in the front yard. The sign was pretty straightforward, but I wouldn't put it past these kids to find a loophole. They knew me as the cool neighbor, the single guy who gave out full-size candy bars on Halloween and sometimes played baseball in the street with them. The guy who drank on his front porch and sometimes let them fish in his canal, if it was okay with their parents, that was. On some things, however, they knew that I was unbending, and it wouldn't do to argue with me. They all looked up when I came out on the front porch and leaned against the rail to look at them. "If you're hoping to find a play in the dirt free card somewhere on top of that pile, it ain't happening." Reggie looked up, and his face was still hopeful. "Gee, Mr. McQuinty, that sure is a great-looking pile of dirt you have there." I nodded, keeping my face neutral as I tried not to smile. "Sure is, and it's for filling in gopher holes, so I'll likely need all of it. If there's any left, though, I'll be sure to let you kids know so you can trample it flat for me." They rode off down the road, sitting a little higher on their bikes as they realized they might still get to play in it. I shook my head as I watched them leave. I'd never known anyone to get so excited about a pile of dirt, except maybe for a bunch of kids. Something about all that fresh, powdery dirt just made them go a little bit crazy. As I looked at the 6-foot mound of fine white dirt, I almost felt like jumping on it myself. I went inside to finish my preparations, getting my work clothes on and finding my gloves. I sat in the living room pulling my boots on when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I glanced up, the afternoon shadows just starting to lengthen, and saw a pair of small figures standing beside the road. I paused in mid-tie, looking up to see two small forms looking at the pile of dirt. It looked to be a couple of neighborhood kids, maybe having one last look before getting back to their game. I shook my head. Kids were so predictable. I finished tying my boots and stepped out onto the front porch. "Hey, looking's fine, but I don't want to see anyone in my..." The road was empty. I looked up and down the road. The kids were already playing a game of touch football further down the cul-de-sac. And I picked up my shovel as I thought about how strange that had been. Those two must have really been booking it to make it back to their playmates so quickly. As I started scooping dirt, I thought longingly about having that kind of energy. It would certainly make this job a lot easier. I spent the rest of the afternoon filling in gopher holes. It had been a particularly bad season for them, and the dirt was a band-aid solution at best. The gophers would continue to dig up my yard until I invested in a dog or something. I kept slinging dirt until the sun grew low in the sky, one angry Chuck actually coming up to growl at me before I threw a shovel full of dirt in his face. When it became too dark to see, I thrust my shovel into the pile of dirt and shook the remaining dirt off myself. The kids were finishing up their football game, heading home as the streetlights came on. They all looked longingly at the pile of dirt, but they knew better than to make a play for it while I was standing on the front porch. My cigarette winked on and off as I stood watching the sun go down, and I pitched the end into the dirt as I went inside. I was frying up some hamburgers when I heard the first tremors of laughter from my front yard. Over the sound of popping grease, I could hear the scuttling laughter of children as they played out front. I walked over to the living room window and looked out into the front yard. By the streetlight's ghostly light, I could see them playing on the mound of dirt I had out front. There were two of them, both dressed in dirty jeans and colorful shirts, both having a ball as they capered on my pile of dirt. I was out the door in a matter of seconds, yelling before the door had fully opened. "Hey, just what the hell do you think you're doing? Can't you read? Stay off the..." The streetlights were dim, but even I could see the absence of anybody in my yard. I walked over to the pile, looking around to see if someone was hiding behind it. I saw pretty quickly that wasn't going to be the case. The pile of dirt was hardly 3 feet tall, and a kid would have to get pretty low to hide behind it. I glanced up and down the street, but the only thing moving on the road was an old chip bag pushed by the wind. I looked back at the pile and was shocked to find that I didn't even see any footprints. The wide, low dirt pile still looked fairly pristine, other than my shovel marks, of course. I scratched my head and went back inside. Maybe I'd just been working too hard today. I pulled my fries out of the oven just as they started to burn. I made 2 hamburgers and added them to the pile of french fries. I tipped a beer into a chilled glass and brought both to the table. After shoveling dirt all afternoon, I was tired and ready for a bite. As I lifted the first one from the plate, I heard my stomach grumble as the grease oozed off the meat. I had just taken the first bite when I heard the metal clang of my shovel falling over. I looked up to find those kids playing on my dirt again. I came barreling out the door, my dinner cooling on my plate, as I stormed out to send these kids off. I was becoming frustrated. I'd made it pretty clear that I didn't want people on my pile of dirt. I had been pretty nice about it, posting signs and asking the kids not to mess with it, but it appeared that some of these kids weren't getting it. If I needed to be a bastard to keep these kids off my dirt, I suppose I'd have to be a bastard. I'd barely gotten 2 words out of my mouth, though, before I once again noticed the yard was empty. I was really getting tired of this. I know what I saw, and what I saw was a pair of filthy kids on my pile of dirt. No matter how many times I checked the yard, though, there was never any sign of a trespasser. The strangest part was a distinct lack of footprints, though. The sand was fresh, maybe even a little damp when you got past the top layer. The kids had been jumping on the sand like a trampoline. There should have been footprints, handprints, something. They came back 3 more times that night, but the last is the only one that really stands out. That was the worst of their appearances. They appeared again as I was finishing my dishes, and again as I sat watching TV. I came striding out to holler at them both times, but all I found was an empty yard. This was ridiculous. What the hell was going on here? I know what I saw, but they were always gone the instant I came outside. Nobody could move that fast, especially not a couple of dirty little kids. And what the hell were they doing out after dark? Most of the parents on this block didn't let their kids out after the street lights came on. Something funny was going on here. The last time I saw them, that night at least, was just before bedtime. I'd thought the pranks were over as time slipped on. It was 11 o'clock, and I was walking through the living room to get something to help me sleep. I was still a little on edge, and I thought that a nightcap might help me calm down a bit. I was coming out of the kitchen with a tumbler of whiskey, the curtains still open on the front yard, when I saw them there. My glass slipped out of my hand as the 2 kids stood crouching on top of my dirt pile. I was speechless for a moment as the angry fire built inside me. I was furious. Who the hell did these kids think they were? They were coming up in the middle of the night, trying to mess with me. But why? I'd made a very simple request. Why were these kids tormenting me? Because I wouldn't let them play on my damn dirt pile? If I had stopped to quell my anger, I might have noticed that something wasn't right with these 2. The night air was cool on my bare chest as I came shambling out of my house like an angry bull. Who the hell do you think you are? It's almost midnight. Get your asses over here right now. I'm gonna call your parents and let them know what you've been up to. I got a good mind to... They hadn't moved this time, though. They just stood on that mound of dirt like 2 scrawny scarecrows, glowering at me through the dirt caked over their face. My God, had they been eating the dirt or something? I had thought them filthy, but these kids were downright grimy. They didn't seem at all concerned with me, but I definitely had their full attention. I'd come half into the yard when I saw their eyes. They both seemed to have a nasty case of red eye. They stared at me, their eyes seeming to glow somehow, and I suddenly noticed that they cast no shadow in the dim streetlight. They should have. The dirt pile and my shovel cast a long gantry into the falling streetlight, but these 2 had nothing. I had stopped barely 20 feet from the pair when the larger of the 2 took a step towards me. When his dirty sneakers gritted against the loose earth, the red piping looked faded beneath all that mud, and I saw the earth drop over it like a hand. He opened his mouth, trying to say something, but all that came out was wet soil. Sand and mud bubbled out from over his lips, and the dirt that had covered his foot had begun to slide up his leg as well. He fell to his knees, clutching his throat as he coughed up leaves and mud as well. The sand slid over his hands and up his arms. Even as the dirt bound the first boy to the pile by his knees, they both struggled, trying to free themselves from the prison of sand, but their efforts were ultimately in vain. The sand reclaimed them both in a sudden whoosh. In a blink, they were both gone again. I walked backwards, never taking my eyes off that pile, until the door was closed between us. The next day, I set to work early. I wanted that pile of dirt out of my yard before nightfall. I worked diligently, filling in holes and putting dirt to good use. I used it to fill in a few of the potholes in front of my house even. I just wanted as much of it gone as I could manage. I no longer cared how it happened. When the kids came by on their bikes, I told them to leave. They seemed disappointed, but I didn't want them anywhere near that dirt pile. I was filling in an exceptionally large gopher hole when something caught my eye. I had nearly turned back to the pile when something pale and long made me take a second look. At first I thought it was a worm, but the more I looked, the more I thought I knew what it was. I bent down, the shovel hitting the ground woodenly, as I reached down to pick up what I hoped was a bleached piece of wood. It wasn't, though. It was cold, malleable if not unmovable, and crooked like a sea of pale, purpling flesh. The perfectly filthy nail was hardly visible at the tip of the small finger. I went back to the pile and saw the rest of the hand poking out from the bottom, minus the finger I had accidentally amputated. The cops came when I called, and they brought dogs with them as well as the big white forensics van. They excavated the bodies of a 10-year-old boy from the bottom of the dirt pile, his face frozen in a look of terrified disbelief. He was dressed in very dirty, if not very familiar clothes, and his sneakers had that same filthy red piping that I'd seen the night before. When they lifted him free, they found that his hand was intertwined with something else that also came loose. The other boy had been about 8, and the two had died hand in hand, it seemed. The police had wanted to arrest me, or at least bring me in for questioning, but the forensics guys had figured out pretty quick that these kids had been dead for the last month. A quick search determined that they had been on the missing persons roster for about 3 weeks, and their parents had feared they'd been abducted by some pervert. They'd been playing near the sand pits before they'd gone missing, and the coroner would later find dirt and mud in their lungs and mouth. He figured they had been climbing the big sand piles out there, piles just waiting to be scooped into a truck and sold as fill dirt, when one of them had been sucked down by a pocket of air or an empty spot in the pile. His brother had tried to help him and ended up getting pulled down as well. The two had suffocated as they tried to get out and been picked up by the fill dirt as they trucked it to the company I had bought it from. It happens sometimes, the coroner had told me when I'd asked about it a few weeks later. Kids never think about that kind of thing. They just see a big pile of dirt and start climbing. I haven't seen the two since they took the bodies away, and the company I bought it from came and got the rest of it before they gave me a full refund. I hope they find peace wherever they are now. I think, from now on, I'll just hire someone to fill the holes in my yard. I don't ever want to see another pile of dirt for as long as I live.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you enjoyed tonight's story and you haven't already, why not go ahead and subscribe? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. While you're here, maybe go ahead and give that video a like and drop a comment. I like it when people comment. If you're not too spooked and you think you might can handle a little more, why not go ahead and click on one of those other videos that's about to pop up. Maybe check out one of our playlists. There's quite a few. If you'd like to support the channel more monetarily, I'd suggest maybe you go pick up a copy of my latest book. There's a link below. Or maybe head on over to Patreon. I have quite a few tiers. I'm sure there's one that'll suit you best. Speaking of Patreon, let's go ahead and thank our patrons, shall we? Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. And thanks to Winters, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Martha, Marianne Schuler, Jennifer Damron, and Tyler Parker for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, guys. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you're a fan of my books, I always recommend go ahead and join that Ghostly Reader tier. $10 a month, and it also gets you a book anytime I write one, which is around twice a year usually. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.